Welcome back to Q Score, where each week the Q in Q Score, sit down with some of the most influential music supervisors and/or composers in the industry. My next guest has made his life in music supervision on the edge of independent film with some very interesting TV shows thrown in for spice, like The L Word and the classic Greg the Bunny. Howard has supervised some of the coolest of the cool films, like Monster, Bully, and where it all started with him as soundtrack producer on the doc Dogtown and Z-Boys. He's also music supervised studio mainstream films like Herby Fully Loaded and the new film Vampire Academy. Let's welcome Howard Paar. Welcome, Howard Paar. How are you, buddy?
All right, John. Good
to see you.
Thanks
so
for having
we
me.
both kind of come from the same world. Although you're from England, I'm from Staten Island. They're very different places.
There's something in common there.
Something in common, I'm sure. People like to drink. That's what's in common.
Exactly.
We both started in the record business, and you were at Polygram. I was at A&M, and you started acquiring soundtrack and producing soundtracks. Talk about some of that early stuff for you before you got into supervision.
I was at Polygram and was going through that era where I think a lot of the bands that I was working with, some of the British bands that I was A&R involved with for the US, were not really getting the serious radio attention, and I started looking for other avenues, to be honest, to help them find their way. And one of the thoughts was to get music out to independent filmmakers. This was the moment when Pulp Fiction and films like that were coming, which was really galvanizing for me. And Tim Booth from the band James and I met with a number of people, and the most compelling script we'd read at the time was for a filmmaker called Greg Araki, and he had just completed a film called Doom Generation that was out, and the soundtrack was coming out. We went to see him, and with an eye to get Tim in the movie, and one thing led to another. Ultimately, Ed Eckstein, who was my boss at the time at Mercury, Polygram, agreed to come and see Greg's last film. I was like, we've got to do the soundtrack to his next movie. And Ed, I'm betting, is probably the only president in the US who would have done it, but he came and saw it, got what we were talking about for the next one, and dived right into doing the Nowhere soundtrack. So at that point, I was really, learning on the fly. Peter Coquillard was the music supervisor, and we worked very closely together, all of us on the soundtrack, and we got, a pretty amazing bunch of artists to help us with unreleased tracks, from Radiohead through to the Chemical Brothers, and I just instantly got addicted to it.
So that was it. So you saw the bell went off for you that you wanted to get out of this other stuff and just do this.
It really, very quickly. I mean, I felt completely compelled. There was just no other way.
And what do you think makes a good music supervisor? What is it that you bring to it that you think that you're perfect for it, and how the game works?
I think you could speak to this as well as me, but I think to a degree, having that background in the record companies really helped, because I'd grown up working with artists and I understood how record companies would think in terms of getting artists to be involved with film, and I think that was a big edge. That sort of period felt very wide open to me in terms of independent film versus studio films. I mean, I've got a pretty broad taste in film. Like, you and I met, if I remember correctly, when you were just into New Line, perhaps, and you guys were doing Austin Powers.
Right, that was a movie that nobody would give me a deal on.
Yeah.
No record label would give me, but I said, you're British, right?
Exactly.
You should do Austin Powers.
I wanted to do it so badly, and after a couple of those where at this point, Ed had moved on, and at that stage where you're not getting to do the films you want necessarily.
It's a record company regime change, it happens a lot.
Yeah, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to go independent and do this, partly because the other side to it was I realized I couldn't be in a situation where I'm jamming songs on a filmmaker, and to some extent, when you're at a record company,
that's your job.
Your roster is that, and if the roster doesn't fully match, I just wasn't in my heart to say, no, you need to use this. At that stage of the game, I realized I'd be better off working on the film side of it with a director.
Right.
And that's where I went.
So like you first couple movies, you ended up with great collaborations. So talk about working with a filmmaker like Larry Clark, right, who did Bully, and what are some of his other big films?
Yeah, Larry and I first met on his film Another Day in Paradise, and it was basically, it was James Woods, Melanie Griffiths, Vincent Kartheiser, who ended up in Mad Men later, and it was an Outlaws on the Run story, but the idea was to use all vintage soul. And that was what I grew up with, the Stax soul was just so close to my heart. So Larry and I started working on that, and to this day, it's one of those films where pieces of that come on TV and I just can't stop watching it, because he will let music be used to a full extent. Like, he's not scared of letting a song play all the way through and hitting and cutting to it right at that right moment. And after that film, if I wasn't addicted before, I was completely hooked by that point. And
those are the guys that you want to collaborate with, right?
Yeah,
because they understand how music should be used, but not everybody does.
Very much so. And I think also the beauty of working with any director on multiple occasions is you get your shorthand down. Sometimes the first film, although for Larry and I, it was just very natural from the get-go. And, it was interesting because we went on, Bully was another great experience in terms of Larry. There's always an adventure with Larry on somewhere along the line. Some song we gotta have comes into it, with Bully, Brad Renfrew, the actor, sang along to an Eminem song repeatedly.
Wow.
There was no coverage. And I was like, that's shot in Florida, and I got the film back, and I'm like,
Eminem, who notoriously does not clear a lot of music.
Eminem and Dre, this is like the height of their powers, and I think it was the first time I had to really, I knew there was no way out. Like, they had no coverage on the scene. We got into scope to allow us to show the visual for the scene with no song being used. And then he sang in every single usage of it. So we finally, months go by, we finally got Dre to watch the film. Met up with Eminem. Fortunately, Eminem was a big Larry Clark fan, which really helped.
Wow,
so we
that's crazy.
with Eminem at the MTV Movie Awards. Like, we were like, okay, we got a meeting, we'll come anytime, Got down there. Then Dre signed off on it. And so there's always an adventure with Larry. And I think this time, bringing it sort of full circle, he's just finished a French language film that called The Smell of Us, which was entirely French cast, other than Michael Pitt, who has a small part, and the only non-French people involved are me and Larry.
But you've retained that relationship over the years, that even though he could get a French music supervisor, he calls you because you have that relationship.
It was
and
really,
that continuity is one of the key things of the game. In any film crew, how do you stay on that guy's crew?
Yeah.
And so I'm curious about that, because you did also with Greg Araki, about how those relationships, how important they are.
I think, I mean, look, I think with Larry, it's, I was really honored, truly, because he called me from France, and there was certainly the inference that the French wanted to use entirely French people, including music supervisor, and he called me and said, look, Another Day in Paradise was best soundtrack ever. You've got to do this one. I'm like, are you kidding? Of course, I want to do it. But we were reflecting, a lot on how much had changed in the interim from Another Day in Paradise to The Smell of Us. I mean, literally, when we were doing Another Day in Paradise, I would get the old clunky, toast blue burner out and burn him the ideas down on music and drive him over to Silver Lake. And, this time he's sitting in Paris and there's stuff flying in on an FTP
So you feel
side.
technology has helped our business as far as being able to communicate and move things around?
It's changed it, and I think I'm really curious because, to see what your experience has been like in recent years. I think it's helped it efficiency-wise, certainly, an independent film where budgets are tight, you need to get music flown up, editors will go in, you have an assistant editor at night, start laying the ideas in. So I think on that ease of business and doing your job, it's radically improved it. I think perhaps what we've lost a little bit is the time sitting, trying songs to picture.
I miss that, yeah.
I've done so many films that were in New York or elsewhere, Vampire Academy posted in London, so it enables you to do all this great work with someone, and we've all got Skype and things, but I think there's a little bit of that sitting in a room, trying the songs to picture
Sure.
with an editor and a director.
And how did you find when you did Greg the Bunny and you did some other TV shows? How did you find? What do you find the difference of doing TV versus film? And obviously it was different back then with Greg the Bunny because that was a while ago. But talk about that.
I think, you know, simplistically, there's more people involved. You know, and more people involved in the equation. You know, TV predominantly is, you know, writer-producer's medium, so the director's role is different, and there's just more people involved. You know, I think I love the immediacy of it. You know, certainly, you know, you're putting things in, and certainly if you're using new music and having that instant rush of things being out there quickly, I love that side of it. You know, so it's just different mediums. You know.
And then one of your biggest movies that went from super indie to mainstream was Monster.
Yeah.
Talk about that experience, because that was kind of a, you know, Charlize Theron in this incredible role, and it just blew up. What do you attribute that to?
You know, well, Patty Jenkins is an amazing filmmaker, and Charlize's performance obviously was just riveting. I think what I always flash back to was going to see the first cut of it at night, and I may be slightly exaggerating, but I feel like the cut was probably, the assemblage, if you will, was almost like, it felt like 2.5, 3 hours long, and I remember just being riveted to every single frame. And I knew at that point I would never be a good editor, because I wouldn't know where to start to cut it down. It was just, I'm like, this is just, and yet I don't want to go and see a 3-hour movie for the most part.
What type of songs did you use in that film?
It was a lot of period songs, you know, everything from, you know, Crimson and Clover, In Excess, Blondie. The big one was Journey and Don't Stop Believing.
Oh, was that one of the first big uses of that
That
song?
was probably the big use.
Because everybody looks at The Sopranos and...
Yeah, it was that. Yeah, and it was quite an adventure getting it, and I take no creative credit for it whatsoever. Charlize and Patty, the film was not shot in LA, obviously, so they'd had it on the set, and it went into the movie right at the get-go, and, you know, as soon as I started looking into it, we thought it was going to be really, really difficult to get that song, and there is a long story that I won't bore
That
you
was
with.
Before that song blew up, and now it is impossible to get.
Yeah, I feel, you know, look, for whatever, I think that was the first time it had been used, if I'm not mistaken. And ultimately, we got very lucky. You know, Steve Perry became a big champion of the film. You know, it was one of those things where, you know, Patty wrote these very beautiful letters, and we screened the film, and Charlize was very engaged in that process as well as a producer.
So she worked it also.
She unequivocally did. She was phenomenal, and
that's what it takes sometimes to clear those big pieces of music, because those artists want to feel that the bigness of the filmmakers and the stars are really into their music, and that's going to break down their wall.
I think it's the key. You know, I've always approached things that way, where it's an artist approaching another artist. You know, a filmmaker, you know, if you're going to go for something that's an iconic piece of music, and you're obviously walking in with these films without money to make that aspect of it compelling, you'd better have a damn good artistic reason for doing it, and not just, oh, I want, you know, a Beatles Stones song. It's like, why? And if you've got that reason as a filmmaker, then I think, you know, my job's to be the enabler, you know, at that point, and try and get you what people tell you can't have, you know.
So again, back to the collaboration thing, you know, Mysterious Skin was a movie when I was at Jive, and that was what number movie was that with Araki? Greg Araki? 3 movies. So you did 3 movies with Greg Araki, who's an interesting, very different type of filmmaker. And that film was like, I had kids, young kids, and that movie just scared the hell out of me.
Yeah.
So what was the process on that one for you?
Well, Greg and I, by that point, had done 3 films. This was the 3rd film, and look, you know, we have extraordinarily similar tastes. So, you know, I think it's always very easy working with Greg because, you know, that sort of, all of those creation, dream pop kind of bands, like I think Slow Dive were yet another, you know, opening song for him with that. And with that one was very interesting because we did involve Simon Raymond and Harold Budd to score it, co-score the film. And, you know, it's another aspect of independent film that I love, is where you get the opportunity to work with musical artists who not necessarily as composers, who end up scoring film for you. And, you know, it's another whole aspect to that, you know, Greg's really open to, and I love working with filmmakers who want to do that. I don't know.
And then also, then you flipped the script and went to the mainstream Herby sequel.
Yeah.
So how did you end up on a Disney?
Well, Angela Robinson, who's another just brilliant filmmaker, writer. I'd worked on her independent, Screen Gems film Debs, which was
Right, that was the high school students were spies, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know, look, my taste in films is really broad, and the funny thing for me is, like, I think because I started out doing a lot of dark films, people, you know,
you get pigeonholed.
Right. And I've always been, you know, my whole career, whatever it is, I've always tried to sort of push against being categorized too much. It always, you know, just kick against it, you know. So Angela got to do Herby, and she was amazing and supportive and said, how's the guy? I want to do it with him.
So it was a relationship again.
Yeah, it was a relationship. And, you know, it was a fantastic experience for me. You know, I mean, first of all, you know, working with Mitchell and Cale. Cale and I have known each other since
these
Polygram
are the heads of the
days.
Disney department, right?
Yeah,
Disney music department.
Yeah, and it was phenomenal having those guys around, and it was just a really joyful, collaborative thing. And we had a great time with it, you know. I must admit, I hadn't done like the test screening stuff at the time so much, and the first one, Andrew and I decided to go kind of 70s with the music because she wanted this feel of a happy, warm day at the beach. So we headed down that road, and I remember standing with Mitchell, and I was like, oh, this test screening thing's fun. They love the music. He's like, yeah, you got lucky on this one, you know.
And the L Word, back to TV,
Yeah.
very big series that, you know, had a great cable run.
Yep.
What kind of stuff did you use on that series?
I mean, Eileen Chaikin gave me amazing freedom on that show. When I went in there, it was going into the 4th season, and they really wanted to change up the music. So my idea was Pam Grier was in it, had a bar. I was like, Pam should be left Stax music, you know. So we went in and did a deal with Stax and you know, the Concord guys and Universal Publishing, and we used Stax songs every week through that. And then you know, the rest of it was just discovery of a lot of new music. We didn't have a lot of money. We used, you know, only female vocals for 3 years, 3 exceptions. You know, I think we used, 3 exceptions, but everything else was female vocal, which was an amazing time to do that. You know.
And your newest film, Vampire Academy, just came out.
Yep.
And great soundtrack. You had Bela Lugosi's Dead covered by Churches.
Yeah.
And then the first track on the record, talk about that story, how that record got on, because that's really these interesting little tidbits.
Oh, you know, just one. You know, look, we were chatting about it. One of those sort of joys, I think, is sometimes when you go into a situation and, you know, we were using, you know, a lot of really big artists, and that amazing people came on board for us. And we have one piece of the puzzle left come just before Christmas. And I took first days out I'd taken a couple of years. I was like, I'm going to go to New Orleans, visit a friend, see some music. Happened to hear this artist, James Bullitt, who has moved to New Orleans. She's an electronic artist predominantly, but had really been absorbing the culture of New Orleans. So she used a trumpet player and a drummer and recorded this track called In Your Grave, which she was just finishing and played me while I was there. So I'd sent it to Mark Waters, the director, for this, you know, couple of spots we had left, and he flipped out over the song. We put it into 4 or 5 spots in the film, and everyone who heard it has been galvanized by the song. I mean, it plays great in the film, and it was just one of those little bits of luck and timing that you get, you know, that just one of those gifts from music.
That's
you know?
great.
Yeah.
And so everybody go out and see Vampire Academy. It's playing in theaters now, and Howard is always working on great films, so you'll be seeing him out there, seeing his name on stuff, and go support the cause and the Guild of Music Supervisors. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me,
Howard is
John.
a fellow board member also, and it's been fun. So thanks very much. For more Q-Score, please check us out at emPOWERme.tv to find out what goes on behind the curtain and how the film and TV music gets made. It happens right here. Tune in.